Okay, and we are live. Hello, everyone. I am Courtney Thomas from the Women's Rights and Empowerment Network. I'm joined today by Representative Wendy Brawley and Melissa Moore, also from the Women's Rights and Empowerment Network. We're going to talk to you a little bit today about access to broadband here in South Carolina. And before I even start some of my questions, I want to recognize that, yes, we are on an online platform talking about people who don't have access to broadband internet connections. So we want to recognize the platform that we're using, but also kind of use this time to delve a little bit deeper into this issue. And now this is an opportunity for our network to learn more about why WREN is even investing our thought, our time into this, but also what it means for people in South Carolina. Because remember, WREN has a mission to build a movement to advance the health, economic well-being, and rights of women and girls here in South Carolina. And I think this topic really does just that. So to start, I'm going to ask Melissa, why is this an issue that WREN is taking some time to address?
Yeah, so just like most other organizations and organizers in our state, we can't meet in person. So a lot of our work has now shifted, and our pathways to engaging with people has shifted to all virtual and online spaces. So through that work and through that process, it came to our attention that a lot of our network members don't really have reliable access to broadband. So they can't engage with our work, and they can't engage with all the other myriad of services that are associated with the reality that we're living in right now.
And to you, Representative Brawley, can you just tell me about the district that you serve and if this is an issue that impacts them?
Well, thank you, first of all, for this opportunity and for this forum. And I think it's quite timely to be bringing this issue to the forefront. Broadband, to many people who have it, they think that everyone does. And they've gone about producing what they normally produce and working from home. But for those people who live in districts like mine, which are rural, some of it very, very rural, with absolutely no access at all to broadband, you're isolated. So if you can imagine, over the last several months, you've got children who cannot do any distant or e-learning. You've got parents who cannot even fill out an application online for unemployment. You've got families who may have wanted to get tested for COVID-19 because they felt they were in a hot spot, but couldn't even begin the process because initially, if you recall, it was all through kind of telemedicine. So this is a critical issue in our community. It is a critical issue for the state.
Absolutely, absolutely. But let's kind of break the issue down a little bit more. So, Melissa, what is broadband? Because it's not, for some people, as I think both of you all just mentioned, it's kind of a service or a good that's taken for granted a little bit. So what actually is it?
Yeah, and it's one of those things that when you have it, you don't really realize how important it is. So you don't really know it's important until it's not there. So broadband has to do with speed, and it has to do with the types of cables that data is transferred through. So a lot of times internet service providers don't think it's profitable enough to put those lines required to transmit the data in rural areas or less populated areas. And you'd be surprised to know that there are even parts of Charleston County, which people really think is metropolitan, actually is lacking access.
Wow. And it's interesting because it kind of breaks down some of our assumptions over who has access and who doesn't have access. So I think it's really important for people in our network in particular to understand that this is an issue that can impact people within your neighborhood or within your church group, within your community, and you might not even know it. So I do want to take a moment again to recognize that there was a lack of broadband access before the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes.
And Representative Brawley, is there anything that you want to add to that? Because you did mention that now we're noticing the vacuum of access, but what were people experiencing before this?
That's a really good question. People who lacked broadband, as I said, there's a sense of isolation because you're not able to connect socially. Obviously, you're not, and I think a lot of people thought, oh, it's just for social media, but it's about a lot more than that. It's about essential services, and as more and more companies, as more and more healthcare providers, as more and more learning institutions, both at the K through 12 and higher ed, have to look at internet access and high-speed quality broadband as a way to effectively communicate their messages, you are leaving out tremendous amounts of South Carolina without access. And I think your point was very well taken about it's not always just the rural communities.
Right.
Very often, people in the inner cities are right in the middle of a donut hole where there's no access to them provided. I know situations where people on one street, one side of the street have access, but the people on the other side of the very same street don't. I think we have given enormous latitude to these companies that provide access, and they are deciding who learns, who doesn't, who gets access to healthcare information, who doesn't, who gets access to job interviews, who doesn't. So it is not just limited to the rural communities, though it is most prevalent in our community, rural communities, because we've been left out of the internet age for so long. But this is a problem that inner cities are experiencing as well. And if we don't fix it as a state, the entire state will be left behind because we're in a global society. And if we don't participate globally, we lose opportunity.
Right. And if I may, Courtney, if I may speak to that as well, thank you for uplifting that, Representative Brawley, because as I was learning about gaps in access to our network, I learned how the rules are really written in favor of the internet service providers. So thank you for drawing attention to these companies, because really they self-report their data to the FCC. And they will say if one person in an entire census tract has access, but no one else does, they're allowed to report to the FCC that that entire census tract has access. And, so the FCC's coverage maps have been historically inaccurate.
And that's an excellent point. And I think you're going to find, as we delve deeper into this issue at the state level, and because of what's happened with COVID-19, I was just listening to a newscast where Senator Lindsey Graham is even talking about the importance of expanding broadband statewide. Politicians, myself included, though I think I probably always was on board with this, but those politicians that have probably not even thought that this was critical, now suddenly they understand how critical it is. And I think that is what's going to make the difference because they see firsthand through this COVID crisis that this service is essential. It is as essential as electrical power.
Yes.
And without it, you're going to be left out of the progress, not only for the state, but for the nation. And as I said, we compete globally now. Globally, we will be left behind.
Absolutely. And I mean, you have places in our state like Charleston and Greenville that are very attractive to international business, but how can you make the case for South Carolina being an international competitor when there are pockets of our state that can't communicate outside of their communities? And I think this issue is, like you said, broadband has become as ubiquitous a utility as water. And without it, we are effectively silencing people and trapping them in their homes and in their communities. And that's something that is deeply troubling to me. But also, REN is an advocacy organization, right? So a lot of the times when we tell people to, quote, make your voices heard, we are sending them an action link that is online, or we're telling them to call their representatives or their senators also using an online tool. And that is another level of difficulty that we could not have predicted at this point. But we still want to make sure people are able to redress their grievances or to talk to their like members of Congress or people at the State House. But how can you do that without the tools that we've come to rely on? I also want to bring to the space a recognition that there were some legislators like yourself who were doing the right thing before this. So, I mean, just to put it out there, like Congressman Clyburn, for example, was
absolutely
an absolute leader in championing this issue long before a lot of us were even thinking about this. And even within some of the carve outs for coronavirus response, he's proposed millions for pilot programs that would help healthcare providers and students who are doing distance learning. But Melissa, I think there's something else you can speak to around that as well.
Yeah, so yesterday, actually, Congressman Clyburn's office sent out the a press release about the Rural Broadband Acceleration Act, which would fast track funding for shovel-ready projects. This is really good news.
Yes, it
is. Yes, I would be interested to know where those projects would be located, because I guess the term shovel-ready for me implies that the project has been vetted, that it's been planned and funded, and it's just awaiting sort of a cash influx to break ground. And given the history of internet service providers of sort of bypassing less densely populated areas, I would want to make sure that we have equity, that there's an equitable distribution of the service.
I think that's an excellent point. And to be, I think timing is everything, but I don't know if you're aware, just earlier this week in my district, we reached out, and we have been for some time, to our electric cooperative. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with the electric cooperatives in South Carolina, they provide power service in rural communities that are very sparsely populated and had not been able during the power, I guess, surge in our country in the 40s and 50s to get these larger companies to supply power out into the rural communities. So we have a strong system of co-ops in South Carolina who are already providing electrical power in rural communities. And in my district, Tri-County Electric Cooperative is one of those shovel-ready projects that they are ready to go. They are waiting to get their funding at the federal level, and will hopefully get that funding to get the project farther along than it is going to be. I'm really excited that they are starting in August to actually bring power to their fiber. They're using fiber lines to pull on their existing poles, because they're already there, to bring high-speed quality broadband to rural communities. Yay, big yay. And, we think that what Congressman Clyburn is doing and has done is incredible, really, because he has been a champion for this issue for a long time. And now he has got the support, bipartisan support. I think that bill that you mentioned has a Republican co-sponsor. And they are fighting to get the funding that FCC has already set aside released quickly, as opposed to releasing it incrementally over a 10-year period. And I think that's critical, because we have a need right now in this crisis to do as much as we can, because we know that, if not this particular coronavirus, another type of pandemic is probably going to hit us, and we need to be ready. And so I was really happy to hear that he is pushing to get these funds released early for shovel-ready projects, because I happen to have one in my district that's ready to go.
That's great. And I love that we're speaking to the current moment, but also preparation for whatever the future might hold. I do want to come back to a point that you made earlier in our discussion, Representative Brawley, about telehealth and the ways that people are using this. So just in South Carolina, just for our network and folks who may not know, we've seen, at least since 2010, just an incredible number of rural hospitals that have closed or consolidated, but the end result is leaving folks without care. Some of these counties include Williamsburg, Bamberg, Marlborough, several others. I do want to emphasize that telehealth is not a replacement for in-person care, but it's a tool that people have used when there is no readily available physician or hospital in their area. But is that something that you've seen people experience?
Absolutely. You know, we are fortunate in the Midlands because we have the advantage of being a capital county. And a lot of times we become the petri dish for opportunities that other parts of the state simply don't have. I can tell you that even with children who are in school, we have a lot of children with asthma, and believe it or not, you know, middle school kids with high blood pressure, all kinds of health issues where many of the schools do have at least a part-time nurse, and they can sit in their office, and through telehealth, the doctor can be allowed to, you know, give some type of a treatment to a student with the parent's permission. So what does that mean? It means that the parent doesn't have to lose work time and possibly be impacted economically for the family. But it also means that the child gets immediate care and doesn't lose, most likely if it's not a serious issue, doesn't lose instructional time. So that seems small, but that's huge when you're living in a rural community and the doctor's office or the hospital is 50 miles away. It's a day trip. So, you know, it does make a difference to be able to, you know, have things like telehealth. And as our society continues to age and age and age, which is a good thing, you know, I got gray hair, it's good to age, but you're going to have more and more seniors who elect to stay home, who want to be as independent as possible. Telehealth is going to be critically important for them to be able to do that with any degree of quality. So I think that this is an issue that we're not even fully understanding the greatness of its impact. And if we can manage to get out in front of it and really have the kind of broadband that connects the entire state, that's accessible and affordable for folks to be able to use, it's going to be life-changing for a lot of communities and certainly for a lot of people.
That's right. Absolutely. And there's also the need too, just as, you know, some school districts are working on their reopening plans. Greenville County just released a couple different scenarios, and within most of their scenarios, it includes some kind of e-learning, which makes this even more important. I do want to transition a little bit, Melissa, and talk about some proposed solutions. Some of this. Can you share a little bit?
Sure. So there are a lot of things sort of being proposed to fill in the gaps while we're building out better broadband infrastructure. So I wouldn't call them full solutions. They are stopgaps, and they're important. They're stopgaps to help address the immediate needs while we're addressing the long-term, larger issues. So we've heard about some students who are given Chromebooks, but they still struggle to complete their lessons because they don't have at-home internet access. So some school districts have enabled buses, for example, also with Wi-Fi hotspots. Those are good, but they don't address the full problem because not everybody has reliable transportation. And then you're talking rural areas too, where maybe a parent is working, student doesn't have transportation, or even like a good road infrastructure. So, you know, what if you live 5 miles down a dirt road and it's hard to get to that bus? So really having at-home internet access is a lot more, I guess would make it a lot easier for some households to be able to connect. Another issue is with mobile hotspots. Like, they're a stopgap. Even an unlimited data plan is going to slow down. Your hotspot is going to slow down significantly after you use about 15 gigabytes of data. So when we think about all the ways that we rely on internet, your hotspot will become, quote, a doorstop. I'm quoting my friend from Connect McDowell, which I hope we can sort of give them a plug, because Connect McDowell is this organization that works on broadband access that's been helping us, helping us understand the issue. And anyway, so yeah, my friend over there named Chris, he calls them doorstops. So after you hit 15 gigabytes, that hotspot is as good as a doorstop for you. It slows down significantly. And, you know, I'm just thinking of myself on 6 straight hours of Zoom the other day, because, you know, not only am I connecting with my friends for birthdays, you know, like, let's have a virtual birthday happy hour, or like, let's have, you know, our staff meetings, or connecting with other organizers around the state to share resources. And then, you know, like, plugging into some great webinar content that's out there. You can log 6 straight hours, and you can easily fry your data plan, your whole month worth of data in just, you know, a couple of days. So that's another thing to think about, that they are stopgaps, but they're not going to solve the entire problem. Another thing, you know, so yes, we're talking about high level policy solutions, but really the power is with the people. So I've been listening to a couple of folks talking about how people need to organize, end users need to organize to have more power, so these companies don't necessarily get to run away with your lunch money. A thing to consider when we're thinking about connecting to the internet is privacy. And Representative Brawley, I hope, I know that you care about this issue as well, but there are calls by some activists to end the data mining and surveillance of citizens through their internet connections. So data mining firms are being legitimized right now because they are helping, they're basically spying on people to help with contact tracing. And while immediately that sounds great, they're helping to solve a problem with the pandemic. We're just really trying to manage this crisis. But that's kind of scary, the implications for the future, because now there is an incentive to monetize data mining and spying on people. And there's this company called Palantir. Now, Palantir has partnered with ICE and played a role in the detainment and arrest of undocumented migrant parents, leaving their children without parents. You know, Facebook and other social media platforms are also using facial recognition software to gather data on people who may or may not have been contracted COVID. So we need to keep our eyes on that and make sure that you know, we are centering people's autonomy and privacy when we're talking about building out this access.
I think that's an excellent point. And it is a critical balance, particularly when we find ourselves in a health crisis and economic crisis like we're in now with this pandemic. I think, if, you know, just as an aside, I often just kind of laughed as I look at things. If I could be on Wayfair or Overstock or some of my favorite little HGTV sites, and I'm looking at furniture, right? And then all of a sudden, as I'm on Facebook or if I'm on anything, suddenly here's the kind of furniture that I was looking at just popping up in my feed. So this kind of tracing is already being done. It's already being monetized. Mm-hmm. We have to decide what the balance is, whether or not we are going to allow certain encumbrances in order to keep us safe. I think we do that in the airline industry. We do that in a lot of industries. Where we've accepted that we're going to be searched, that we're going to have to stand with our arms out and be wand, but we're going to know that hopefully no one's on the plane with a weapon. And so we have to kind of find that balance. I can say this, whatever it is, and there needs to be a balance, it needs to be one that's deployed nationally It should not be something where you go to one state and it's something, and then another state it's totally different. There has to be a degree of uniformity. So I say all this to say that I think the federal government is going to have to lead on this issue, because there needs to be some consistency in competition for this data, because it's worth money, as we all know, because we're being tracked right now. But at the same time, we have to understand that maybe some degree of tracking through contact tracing for this particular pandemic is going to be required in order to notify those folk who may have been exposed to the virus because of them contacting another positive individual. So I cannot tell you that I know the balance of what that is, but I do know that we are a country that values privacy. And we cannot allow the companies whose business it is to make money to be the dominant factor in deciding what the rules will be. I think our elected officials, hopefully Congress, will be making those decisions with the input of their citizenry and state officials like myself, as opposed to the lobbyists and the money interests that may not have our privacy at heart. It is a tough issue. It really is. But I do think, for consistency's sake, whatever we determine to be the best solution will have to be a federal and a nationwide solution.
Absolutely. And just to put a bow on it here, can you tell us about anything that is happening at the state level in the legislature to address some of these issues of access, these issues of privacy, and what can people in our network do to help influence these decisions? Because I know there are people who absolutely want to have their voices heard around this.
I think that's an excellent question. The Speaker of the House recently appointed me to the COVID Education Committee. And our goal is going to be to look at some of the regulations, some of the statutes, some of the funding even surrounding education in South Carolina, K through 12 and preschool, as it relates to COVID. And I think Accelerate South Carolina has just, I think on yesterday, released its recommendations to the governor on what they believe should happen to address some of these issues. I was pleased to see that broadband is one of those things that they have identified that is an issue for our state. They have an accelerated ed committee that the superintendent of education has impaneled, and they too have expressed the importance, again, of access to statewide broadband. It's interesting, there are more than 30,000 children from K through 12 in South Carolina that we've heard nothing from since mid-March. And some numbers are put that at 40,000. Now think about that. These are children who were in school Monday through Friday, and suddenly we've heard nothing from them since we've gone to e-learning. And a large part of that is not just derelict parents, and some will try to tell you that is the reason, but it's not. It's because they haven't the access to the internet broadband. And because their parents are those essential workers at grocery stores and convenience stores and hospitals, and they are not the people who can simply take off and work from home. So we know that this is a legislative issue that we have to address. And I'm going to be quite honest with you. We can talk all day long, but if we are not willing to put money into this process, we're going to be in the same position when the next pandemic or declaration of emergency takes place. Now, South Carolina is going to get $1.9 billion, plus what they are sending, the federal government has sent to individual agencies like the Department of Ed, DHEC, DSS. Lots of money will and has come to this state. We have got to allocate some of that money to making certain that those projects that are shovel ready get the match that they need on the state level to be implemented. And we also need to make certain that we are guiding and providing funding for those projects that aren't shovel ready, to get them ready to be implemented and provide broadband. I do think quite honestly, I'm optimistic, and people tell you I'm a happy lady, so maybe I'm just thinking too positively. But I honestly believe that this time we're going to do something. This time, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans, are going to do something, because this has impacted this entire state. Our economy will suffer if we don't do something. Our health will suffer if we don't do something. And most importantly, education, not just K through 12, but what happened with all these colleges? They were sent home to do distance learning. So if those students didn't have access, they too were in the same situation as the K through 12 students when they went home with no access to the internet. And remember, in this crisis, even the libraries closed. So that's where a lot of people would typically go to have access in the event that they did not have it at home. So yes, I do think legislatively there's a lot that will be done. What can the people do to make certain that it happens? Call your legislators, write them, impress upon them that this is a family value issue. This is an essential service issue. And let them know that, as we are ticking down the things that we're giving money to, these dollars that have come to us from the federal government, that broadband has to be and has to remain at the top of the list.
Absolutely. I think that is a good place to leave it. Before we go, Melissa, do you have anything else to share just from the folks that you've been learning from and people you're in community with?
Yeah, the folks that I've been learning from are resilient, just like the most resilient communities. We're very blessed in South Carolina to have some very talented, creative organizers. And investing in broadband as it was a public utility is something that'll build our resilience. We can handle anything that comes at us, but we need the right tools.
Right.
So thank you, Representative Brawley, for holding court for that.
Well, thank you all for the work that you do, raising awareness on so many critical issues. Y'all are so much more REN is than what comes to mind. People think of REN as a women's organization, but you're really a people's organization. And I really thank you for supporting the people of our state.
Fantastic. So if people are interested in learning more about this issue, there is a blog on our website right now, www.scren.org/blog. It'll be the first thing on that page. It's also on our homepage. Again, we're directing you to an internet resource. I recognize that. But also, I think it's really imperative on people who do have privilege to learn as much about this as possible so that we can work and serve to build a more connected community. With that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and look out for more content like this. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.